It started with a smile, a thin, rehearsed smile stretched across Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's face as she introduced the segment. "We're honored tonight," she said, "to welcome the military leader of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré. Some call him a revolutionary. Others call him a dictator. But tonight, we call him our guest." The studio audience offered polite applause, but the tone was already set. This was not an interview. This was a stage. A trial. And AOC was here to prosecute. The lighting in the studio was soft and sleek, modern like everything else in Manhattan's progressive media bubble. Traoré, wearing his signature olive jacket and quiet calm, sat across from her. His eyes were steady. He had been in war zones more volatile than this set. But make no mistake, he understood the battlefield he was on. "President Traoré," Alexandria began, her voice laced with condescension masked as curiosity, "there's been a lot of talk about your, let's call it, unconventional approach to governance. Human rights groups say you've restricted press freedom. Others say you're cozying up to Russia and China. What would you say to Americans watching who see your rule as a step backward?" The jab was immediate. Wrapped in polite phrasing, but a jab all the same. Traoré didn't blink. He waited 2 seconds. 3. Then he leaned forward slightly. "I would say," he replied slowly, his voice measured, "that Americans should understand the difference between press freedom and foreign propaganda. And that choosing our own path doesn't mean we are moving backward. It just means we're not following yours." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. AOC shifted in her chair. "Oh, no doubt," she responded quickly. "But you do realize we provide billions in aid to your continent every year. If the US is such a problem, why are you accepting our help?" There it was, the veiled insult, cloaked as policy. Traoré turned his head slightly, studying her. "With respect, Congresswoman," he said, "aid with strings is not help. It's leverage. And when a gift comes with a leash, it's not generosity, it's control." A pause. The audience, unsure how to respond, went silent. He continued, "What you call help often comes with conditions that force us to choose between dignity and dependence. And we've made our choice." Alexandria smiled again, but her eyes had narrowed. This was not going as planned. She had expected defensiveness. Evasion. Not precision. And certainly not this kind of unapologetic clarity. This was just the beginning, but the tone of the night had already shifted. The battle was now even. The host tried to regain her rhythm. AOC leaned forward, slightly firmer now, her hands gesturing with controlled energy. "Okay, so let me ask you directly, if the US is offering leashed aid, as you call it, then why do your citizens still benefit from American NGOs, American medicine, American technology? Isn't that proof that we're doing more good than harm?" She smiled triumphantly, clearly expecting this to land as a rhetorical checkmate. But Traoré didn't flinch. Instead, he raised a single eyebrow. "Madam Congresswoman," he began, his voice calm and laced with gravity, "your question assumes that Africans are incapable of surviving without American intervention. That's the real problem." A stir in the studio. Viewers at home likely sat up straighter. "You call it helping," he continued, "but you forget, many of those medicines are produced from plants grown in our soil. Much of that technology depends on minerals extracted from our land. And NGOs? They often pay their directors 10 times more than the local workers they claim to uplift." He paused, letting the silence work for him. "You see assistance. We see a system where we provide the raw resources, and the West sells them back to us at a premium. That's not help, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. That's a business model. One we're no longer subscribing to." The live chat on the streaming platform exploded. Comments poured in. Some furious. Some stunned. Some calling it the most honest moment in political TV. Alexandria cleared her throat, blinking rapidly. She tried to pivot. Well, she said, forcing a laugh, I guess we've all learned something tonight about post-colonial paranoia. The jab was no longer subtle. It was loaded, dangerous, and Traoré caught it in the air like a thrown dagger. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile. Paranoia, he said, locking eyes with her, is when someone fears something that isn't real. But our history with your governments? Our leaders overthrown, our resources extracted, our decisions vetoed from thousands of miles away. That's not paranoia. That's memory. A heavy silence followed. Even the production crew in the background stopped moving. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stared at him, searching for her next move. But the energy had shifted. Her confidence, once bolstered by her platform, was starting to fracture under the weight of Traoré's unwavering stare. He wasn't playing the part of the grateful guest. He was rewriting the rules of the conversation. And the American audience? They weren't just watching, they were beginning to listen. For a moment, Alexandria sat frozen. She wasn't used to this. Most foreign leaders played along, smiled, nodded, danced around tough questions. Not this man. Not Traoré. So she recalibrated. Went on offense. You speak a lot about exploitation, she said, tapping her pen on the cue cards now resting uselessly in her lap. But let's not ignore your own record. Reports from Human Rights Watch say you've shut down radio stations, arrested journalists, and curtailed political opposition. Isn't that just authoritarianism in a different costume? Now it was Traoré who leaned forward. But this time, there was no politeness in his tone. Those reports you mention, he said, come from organizations funded by the same governments that colonized us. They never sent reporters when terrorists burned our villages. Never published reports when French troops used our land for operations without our consent. But the moment we say no to foreign bases and reclaim our minds, they discover their passion for press freedom. He straightened up. You don't care about journalists in Burkina Faso. You care about influence. The words cut sharper than any accusation so far. The air in the studio was dense now, every syllable felt like it carried weight. AOC crossed her arms. So you're saying criticism of your leadership is invalid just because it comes from the West? No, Traoré replied. I'm saying that Western criticism is often not about values, it's about control. If I jailed a dissident while aligned with your interests, you'd call me stable. But if I jail a foreign operative while opposing your policies, I become a dictator overnight. He paused, then delivered the blow with surgical calm. Your problem isn't what I do. Your problem is that I do it without asking your permission. Even the camera crew was holding its breath. Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth, but there was no comeback. Only the faint hum of studio lights and the rising pulse of a moment turning historic. For years, she'd been the one wielding moral authority. Now, someone else had seized it, on her own stage. Social media was erupting. Clips from the debate were already going viral before it ended. One moment in particular, Traoré saying, "Your problem is that I do it without asking your permission," was looped endlessly on X, Instagram, and even mainstream news broadcasts. In a downtown DC bar, a group of young Hill staffers sat frozen around a television. Someone whispered, "He's mopping the floor with her." In Harlem, a veteran activist tweeted, "You may not like him, but Traoré just exposed the hypocrisy we've danced around for decades." In the White House press room, aides began preparing a briefing memo. The State Department was already on edge. Back in the studio, the tension thickened. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wasn't done, but her composure had cracked. She narrowed her eyes and said, "You claim independence, but your economy relies on foreign infrastructure, foreign investment, foreign currency. That doesn't sound like sovereignty." It sounds like a fantasy dressed up in revolutionary slogans. Traoré didn't blink. He simply nodded. You're right, he said. It's not sovereignty yet. But it will be. And every insult like yours only reminds us why we must get there faster. He leaned slightly toward her, not in threat, but in truth. You see, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, America was once like us. Colonized. Mocked. Dismissed. But your forefathers didn't ask for approval, they took their future in their own hands. That's all we're doing now. Except we don't want to become the next empire. We just want to live without one. A rare hush fell over the live audience. Even Alexandria's most loyal supporters in the front row weren't cheering. The power of his words wasn't just rhetorical, it was historical. You know what the difference is? Traoré asked, now addressing the camera directly. When America stood up to the British, it was called freedom. When Africa stands up to the West, it's called defiance. Maybe it's time we stop calling truth by names that make you feel comfortable. AOC looked stunned. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. The host tried to cut to commercial. Traoré smiled politely. Please. Go ahead. Take a break. You'll need it. The screen faded to black, while a nation, and the world, stared into a future where the rules of engagement had suddenly shifted. Backstage, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez paced in tight circles, the heel of her shoe tapping against the concrete floor like a metronome of frustration. Her communications director stood nearby, whispering frantically into her earpiece. Damage control, he muttered. We need a statement. A pivot. Something. Alexandria held up a hand. I don't need a script. I need a strategy. The commercial break ticked on. Meanwhile, in Traoré's green room, the energy was calm, eerily so. He was sipping a glass of water, flanked by two aides. One of them checked his phone. Mr. President, the aide said with a smirk. You're trending in 43 countries. Let them talk, Traoré said. They only talk when something shifts. Back in the studio, producers scrambled. The control room was buzzing with conflicting orders. Sponsors were nervous. Calls were coming in from Capitol Hill. When the cameras returned, both guests were seated again, but the dynamic had changed. Alexandria's smile was strained. Traoré's, effortless. The host, trying to reclaim balance, posed a new question. President Traoré, some critics say your rhetoric is divisive, that it encourages hostility toward Western allies. What do you say to that? Traoré raised an eyebrow. Allies, he echoed. That word is doing a lot of heavy lifting. He looked at AOC. An ally doesn't mock your accent. An ally doesn't fund opposition parties in your country while shaking your hand. An ally doesn't extract your gold and sell it back to you at a markup. What you call alliances, we experience as pressure. Debt. Obedience. So no, I'm not interested in those alliances. Alexandria cut in, her voice sharper now. No one is forcing you to work with the West. But let's be honest, if you had to stand completely alone, your country would collapse. That was the spark. Traoré sat forward, suddenly intense. Then let it collapse, he said. Better to rebuild from rubble with dignity than to live forever on your knees. Gasps echoed through the studio. Ocasio-Cortez blinked. The audience froze. Even the host was silent. Traoré looked directly into the camera. America was built by those who refused to bow. You celebrate your revolution every 4th of July. Why shouldn't we have ours? It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. And millions watching across the globe felt the tremor. The debate had officially ended, but the real war was only just beginning. Within minutes of Traoré's final remarks, hashtags exploded across the internet. Hashtag #TraorTruth. Hashtag Revolution Televised. Hashtag Traoré. Clips circulated like wildfire. One particular line, "Better to rebuild from rubble with dignity than to live forever on your knees," was being stitched into reaction videos, TikToks, podcasts. Even news anchors paused mid-broadcast to remark, "That was one of the boldest things we've heard on American television in years." Inside the Beltway, Alexandria's camp was scrambling. Donors were calling. Liberal think tanks were issuing rushed statements attempting to reframe the narrative. She hadn't lost the debate entirely, but she hadn't expected a man from Ouagadougou to walk into her house and steal the mic either. Meanwhile, conservative commentators were reveling in the spectacle for their own reasons. One Fox News pundit sneered, "Traoré just did to AOC what no Republican's been able to do in 5 years, shut her up." But beneath the noise, something more interesting was happening. For the first time, Ibrahim Traoré had captured the attention of average Americans, not just African observers, foreign policy wonks, or Pan-African idealists. He wasn't speaking in diplomatic abstractions. He was using language Americans understood: revolution, independence, hypocrisy. He was drawing comparisons between the American origin story and his own people's struggle. And it was landing. That evening, in Brooklyn, a black father sat down with his teenage son and replayed a segment. Listen to this man. He's saying what a lot of folks are afraid to say. In Kansas, a war veteran tweeted, "I didn't agree with everything, but I respect a man who doesn't flinch under fire." In Seattle, a sociology professor wrote a thread comparing Traoré's rhetoric to Malcolm X's. But inside AOC's inner circle, all that mattered was this: optics. He made her look like the Empire, her strategist whispered bitterly. Alexandria sat silently, replaying the debate in her head. One image haunted her, the moment she mocked his accent and he didn't react. No rage. No insult in return. Just that line. "When truth wears a different accent, you call it a threat." She had meant to embarrass him. Instead, he had walked away with the room in his pocket. And the nation in his echo. 3 days after the debate, Washington hadn't cooled. In fact, it had reached a boiling point. CNN ran a panel titled, "The Traoré Effect, Is America Listening?" while the New York Times published an op-ed titled, "An African President Just Exposed the West's Double Standard," on live TV. Even within the Democratic Party, murmurs began to surface. Not about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's platform, but her judgment. She underestimated him, a senior aide said off-record. She tried to meme him and ended up making him a symbol. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, celebrations erupted like someone had won the World Cup. Traoré's speech had gone viral back home, not because it was defiant, but because it was precise. For once, a leader from the global south wasn't apologizing. Wasn't pandering. Wasn't translating pain into acceptable English. He had said it raw. And people felt seen. In New York, Alexandria's team proposed a PR fix, a joint video with Traoré, a unity message, something light. Her chief of staff even drafted a friendly script. "Despite our differences, I welcome President Traoré's perspective. We must build bridges, not burn them." But Traoré declined. Firmly. His press secretary replied with one sentence. "Burkina Faso doesn't do damage control for other people's mistakes." Then came the final blow. Traoré was invited to speak at Columbia University. The student body had petitioned for him, across political lines. His topic, the new language of power. The lecture hall was packed. Ivy League students, professors, diplomats, activists, all watching. And there, with no teleprompter, no cue cards, Traoré stepped forward and began. For too long, leadership has been confused with tone. Politeness mistaken for peace. Power for permission. But true power is when a man can be insulted in front of millions, and still not become what they expect of him. You could have heard a pin drop. He continued. When a powerful nation mocks your accent, it's not about language, it's about ownership. They mock what they no longer control. But we are done being managed. In that moment, he wasn't just speaking for Burkina Faso. He was speaking for every voice the world had tried to mute with polite scorn. Back in Washington, AOC watched a clip of the speech on her phone. Alone. She set it down and whispered to herself, almost with awe. He never raised his voice, but he turned the volume all the way up. By the end of the week, the political ecosystem in Washington was beginning to splinter. Think tanks were holding emergency roundtables. The White House had gone silent. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, once the face of progressive America, was facing backlash from her own base. The debate had been meant to showcase her command of international affairs. Instead, it revealed something else, a blind spot. In an unexpected twist, a petition circulated on Capitol Hill calling for a formal apology to Traoré from the Congressional Progressive Caucus. The text was brief but powerful. Mocking one's culture or accent is not resistance, it's supremacy in disguise. Meanwhile, Traoré remained calm and unmoved. He refused further interviews. He issued no counterattacks. And that silence, once again, made the noise louder. Back home in Burkina Faso, murals were already appearing in Ouagadougou, street art of Traoré standing with a mic in one hand and the words, "Say it with your chest," behind him. It wasn't just admiration. It was reclamation. In New York, Alexandria's team grew desperate. A leaked memo showed that her donors were concerned by recent messaging missteps. She knew what that meant, money talks, and right now, it didn't like the sound of her voice. That's when she did something uncharacteristic. She asked for a private meeting. Through back channels, she requested a one-on-one sit-down with Ibrahim Traoré, off camera, no press, just words between leaders. To everyone's shock, he agreed. The meeting took place in a quiet room at the UN, away from microphones and headlines. Alexandria entered first, composed, but her eyes revealed exhaustion. Traoré walked in minutes later, posture straight, eyes steady, no entourage. Just him. "Thank you for coming," she said, standing. "I didn't come for you," he replied calmly. "I came because the world is watching how you choose to respond to truth." There was silence. Then, she sighed. "I mocked you," she admitted. "I let frustration become arrogance. I spoke from fear." "You spoke from a place that believes it owns the conversation," Traoré said without flinching. "But the dialogue has changed." "I see that now," she replied, softly. "You don't need to apologize to me," he continued. "But you owe one to your people, for pretending to speak for all of them when you hadn't listened to half." She swallowed hard. He stood to leave, then turned. "And next time," he added, "don't underestimate the ones who walk in without a flag behind them. Sometimes they carry nations on their backs." And with that, he was gone. Alexandria sat back down, stunned, not just by what he said, but by how true it felt. The media didn't know what to do. There were no tweets from Traoré. No press conference from AOC. No soundbites to slice into controversy. Just silence, and speculation. But something had shifted. The Washington Post ran a front-page headline. "The Day America Was Schooled, Without a Lecture." In Africa, editorial pages called it a diplomatic chess move. Across Latin America, youth leaders began quoting Traoré in their speeches. Even in Europe, skeptical pundits admitted that for once, a so-called developing world leader had outmaneuvered a Western politician, not through rage or rebellion, but through restraint. Traoré became more than a man. He became a mirror. He held up to the West everything it had refused to see, how condescension disguised as inclusion still bites. How mocking an accent is just colonialism in a new costume. And how the most powerful weapon in politics isn't dominance, it's dignity. The impact wasn't just ideological. Policy conversations began to shift. In Congress, a new subcommittee was formed, Voices Beyond Borders. Its mission? To re-examine how American diplomacy engages with leaders in the global South. And yes, Traoré was invited to address its first meeting. He declined. Instead, he sent a message, read aloud in the chamber. America must stop asking if we are ready for democracy, ready for leadership, ready for dialogue. The real question is America ready to listen to someone who doesn't look or sound like itself? We are not waiting for your answer. We are already acting. Some members applauded. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. As for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she didn't disappear, but she paused. She took a break from public appearances. Traveled briefly to New Mexico. Met with grassroots leaders in silence, not speeches. She wasn't cancelled. But she had been humbled. And she knew it. In a podcast weeks later, she was asked about the debate. Her answer was short. He didn't just challenge me. He changed me. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré was planting trees with schoolchildren, laughing, sleeves rolled up. When a journalist shouted, "Mr. President, any comments on the AOC debate fallout?" He smiled and said, "No need to talk. The roots are already growing." 6 months later, the stage looked very different. At a global youth summit in Nairobi, Traoré was once again invited to speak. The event was packed with leaders, students, artists, and journalists from over 50 countries. The energy in the room wasn't just political, it was generational. Traoré stood at the podium without notes. His voice was calm, deliberate, and sharp. "I was told I didn't belong. I was told I was a guest in rooms I helped build. But let me say this clearly, the age of permission is over. We're not asking to be heard, we're taking the mic." Applause erupted. He paused, then continued. "Some mocked our voices, our names, our accents. But an accent is proof you know more than one world. Some tried to humiliate us. But humiliation is just fear in disguise." He locked eyes with the cameras. "They said, you can't survive without us. We say, watch us thrive." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. What began as a moment of mockery on live television had turned into a continental conversation, and a global shift. Traoré's restraint had been louder than anger. His clarity had been stronger than political strategy. And his dignity had sparked a new kind of leadership, one that didn't wait for approval from the old world. Back in the U.S., Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez quietly co-sponsored a new bill supporting independent media and development projects in West Africa. She didn't announce it with a press conference. She just signed it and sent it forward. Later, when asked why, she said, "Sometimes the best way to respond to power is to recognize it." And in a high school in Harlem, a teacher played a clip from the debate, not the insult, but the response. A student in the back raised her hand and said, "That guy didn't even get mad. He just told the truth." The teacher smiled. Exactly. And sometimes, that's all it takes. In a world that's often loud with outrage and hungry for spectacle, Traoré reminded us that real power doesn't shout, it stands. He didn't win the argument by crushing his opponent. He won it by refusing to play the game. And maybe that's the future of leadership, not dominance, but dignity.